reporting?
I got a strange going on out here. Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree. I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
Damn it, I'm really confused. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence, and he was dead when she hit the ground. I didn't see any cars. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence.
911, what are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was?
Catch it if I was going to chase it, but whatever it was standing up. I'm out here looking through the window now, and I don't see anything. I don't want to go outside. Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
See up!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
In the summer of 1924, a group of gold prospectors stumbled out of the woods in Washington state. Fred Beck, Gabe Lefevre, John Peterson, Marion and Roy Smith had an amazing story to tell about a run-in with 7-foot-tall, ape-like creatures in the woods. The men claimed they were about 8 miles away from Spirit Lake when they had an encounter with 4 of these creatures. Fred Beck fired his weapon, striking one of them 3 times. The creature would fall over a cliff. Once the men made it back to their cabin later that night, the creatures attacked. They threw rocks at the cabin, clawed their way up to the roof, underneath the floorboards, slamming their bodies into the wall, trying to get to the men inside. It appeared to be revenge for what had happened with the beast earlier in the day. The attack eventually subsided, and the men were able to make it to safety with an amazing story to tell. This is their story, the story of Ape Canyon. Hey guys, and welcome to tonight's show. It is Friday. I hope you guys have had an amazing week. Thank you, as always, for taking time out of your schedule to be with us for the show. I'm excited about our guest tonight. I guess you could tell by the intro, we're going to be talking about Ape Canyon. If you've never heard this story, I'm super excited that you get to hear it from the Ape Canyon guy himself tonight. We've got Marc Myrsell on the show. He's going to tell us all about what happened to those miners out there in Ape Canyon. And he's got some cool projects coming up, and he's also going to tell us about his own encounter stories. He's had some encounters up at Ape Canyon he's going to share with us tonight. But as always, I want to invite you, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, please shoot me an email. You get me at brian@sasquatchodyssey.net. You can also visit our new website, sasquatchodyssey.net. You can go to the premium content section and become a member there. Let's go ahead and get into the show. Marc's on the phone. He's raring to go. Welcome to the show, Marc.
Brian, thanks for having me on, man. And I got to apologize. We had something scheduled for a couple of weeks ago, and work got in the way. But today is really good. It's a good time. So I'm really glad that you're having me on, man.
I am too, man. I was sad that we had to reschedule, but we all have that day job, so I totally get it. And I thank you so much for rescheduling and coming on the show. I've been super excited to talk to you, man.
Jack, thank you. That's great.
So I know you've told the story a lot, and I'm sure that there are listeners out there that are listening to this now that have heard the Ape Canyon story, but let's pretend for a second that nobody's ever heard of the Ape Canyon guy and nobody's ever heard of Ape Canyon. Well, first of all, sort of tell us what got you interested in the Ape Canyon attack, and then sort of go into that journey that you've been on for several years now.
I was born in 1966. And so I was raised late 60s, early 70s when I was a young kid in this age where in pop culture there was this tremendous amount of things, of documentaries and docudramas and books of a lot of the unknown mysteries of the world. The pyramids, Atlantis, the Nazca lines, chariots of the gods, all that, and also Sasquatch as well. And as a kid, I just ate that stuff up like crazy. So I've always had a huge interest in the unknown mysteries of stuff that no one has really found before or even figured out, say the Ark of the Covenant. Or whatever. And so with my background in records research, I was like, man, if there is an old story, I'm fascinated with this aspect. If there's an old story and there's a possibility of some sort of physical evidence that could be left behind, something tangible that has never been found, I'm all over that. So yeah, about 10 or 12 years ago, I picked up a book out of the library from our good friend Nick Redfern, and it was called Three Men Seeking Monsters. And in that book, Nick covered the Ape Canyon incident a little bit, plus a lot of other stories in his book. And at the end of the book, he talked about sort of this hypothesis that if you have a piece of research that you're doing, some sort of strange event, UFOs or just anything strange, Nick talked about if you look around the general timeline chronologically, or you look around the general geographic area of where this event took place, more often than not, you could also see and perhaps find other seemingly unrelated events of high strangeness, as John Fort used to say. And that idea really, really grabbed me. So I ended up pulling an old story off of the shelf that, was a little bit wanting to get canned into the circular file of Tall Tale, and that was Ape Canyon. And so I had known about the Ape Canyon story when I was growing up west of Portland a little bit. There was a famous recreation of it done in a movie in 1974, I think, called Sasquatch Legend of Bigfoot, one of the most famous, recreations of the whole Ape Canyon story. And so I picked up the story with Nick's idea in my mind and started researching Ape Canyon as if I had never heard about it, or as if nobody else had ever heard about the Ape Canyon attack in 1924. When I got into, the first thing I would do is look for document record, old newspaper reports. And when I started getting into that, I found this huge treasure trove of document evidence that had never really been brought to light before. When someone picks up, and reads the 3 or 4 pages of the Ape Canyon story in any given Bigfoot book, John Green's books or whatever, it's relatively short and sweet. But man, I found just this massive closet full of information regarding the people involved with the whole attack. Just tons of newspaper reports, lots of good photos. And so that's basically how I got started on my midlife crisis 10 or 12 years ago, researching the Ape Canyon attack.
So once you started down that road of researching, you found these documents and you found, okay, this is a real thing. Something happened there. These guys were there. So sort of, if you wouldn't mind, for those who aren't familiar with the story of what happened there, sort of tell everybody what the Ape Canyon incident is. What happened to those miners up in that cabin?
Oh, sure. The 1924 attack up at Ape Canyon is one of the quote-unquote Bigfoot classics. Anybody who is into Bigfoot basically knows the rough nuts and bolts of the story. But what happened, well, let me back up geographically. Ape Canyon is this dramatic box canyon up on the east flank of Mount St. Helens. If you're going to take that trail, say from the south, and cross the east shoulder of Mount St. Helens headed north toward Spirit Lake, it's pretty much right at the east shoulder of the mountain, approximately maybe a mile and a half from the peak of the mountain or the center of the crater, about halfway between, Lewis River and Spirit Lake, way up at the timberline. And so this is, of course, in Washington State. And so what happened is that starting around 1918 or so. There was this old-timer who was not a spring chicken at all. He was about, in 1918, Marion Smith was about, late 50s, early 60s or so. And he had a young son, Leroy Perry Smith. His daughter, Mabel, married what became his son-in-law, Fred Beck, and a couple of other friends helped them. And what they decided to do was they started to decide, okay, we're going to go out and find gold, because there is a fair amount of gold coming off of Mount St. Helens today, mainly small placer locations along the Lewis River. So east of Woodland, they started poking around at the Lewis River looking for a placer mine location. And so they started going along. This is a number of trips. All of these guys, all these groups, it floated between about 5 and 7 people who had joined this group through the years. All these guys had like day jobs, and so they were only poking along looking for gold when they could, perhaps on the weekends or when they could get some days off. They ended up, after about 3 or 4 years, they ended up filing a claim in one of the most remote, dangerous, god-awful places on the mountain. This is on the south side of Pumice Butte, on the north side of what we now call Ape Canyon. And in 1922, they filed a claim. And so this is a load claim. So it was a hard rock mine just with dynamite and hand tools. And they started digging into the side of Pumice Butte on the north side of the canyon. Well, while they're up there, this is about it's about 4,000 foot elevation, and for us that means it's only about 6 months of the year that you can actually be up there and work. The other 6 months, there's simply too much snow. It gets a lot of snow up there in the wintertime. So they had a limited amount of time for this first couple of years. And at the time, these guys were just tent camping at the base of Pumice Butte. And they would go up every day to get to their mine that they're working on. They're going up the butte and down the other side about 1,000 feet to where their mine was. And so in the first couple of years, things were kind of mellow, they were picking away at this mine a little bit, pun intended, I guess. And some strange stuff started happening. They reported that they would hear from ridgetop to ridgetop these kind of high-pitched whistling sounds at night. There would perhaps be one that was going on up on a ridgetop above them, and then it would quiet down. And then a few minutes later, they'd hear an answering call on the other ridgetop, perhaps about half a mile away. And whatever was up there was talking back and forth to each other for, a lot of the night. They'd also hear these deep thumping bass sounds, like someone beating their chest, and they could never figure out exactly where that was coming from. I believe I've heard a little bit of that up there. A little bit further down the mountain, about 4 or 5 miles. So they weren't sure exactly what was going on. At one point, though, it was where their tent was. It's sort of the drainage coming down off of the mountain from one of the glaciers, and there's a stream. And in the middle of this stream, there was a kind of a sandy bar, sort of a sandy island in the middle of it. And it was young Leroy's turn to go and, scrub out the pots and pans. And he comes back a few minutes later. He takes the pots and pans down to the stream, comes back to the campsite a few minutes later. And he's like, come on. And he's got to, gathering up all the guys, you got to see this. And the report was that right in the middle of this sandy bar, there was this large human footprint, 16, 17 inches long. The strange thing about it was that there were no footprints leading up to this one track, and there were no other footprints leading away from the track. So it just kind of like scratching their heads, what the hell is that? They didn't know. So they kept on working the mine. At the end of 1923, I've come up on and off that mountain a bunch, and so the end of 1923 for them was probably like late October, maybe early November. Though the weather just gets way too inclement after that. They decided that when they were going to return in the spring of 1924, they were going to build a cabin closer to the mine, very, very close to the mine. The whole purpose was to have a place to store tools, store dry food, store stuff, so they didn't, have to haul their stuff up and down the mountain every season. And also the one reason why they also wanted to do that, besides, the ease of storing tools, was that the assays on their gold mine apparently were getting pretty damn good. Not enough to make, millions of dollars or anything, but certainly worth the trouble of building the cabin up there. So when they returned in 1924, that's what they did. This probably would have been my timeline that I've written down and kind of sussed from the newspaper reports. This probably would have been about the third or fourth week in May when they returned in 1924. So they're building the cabin mainly at the end of the day after working the mine. And things kind of started coming downhill pretty quick after that. Just before this about third week in June, Fred Beck and Marion Smith are headed to the creek, headed to the spring near the cabin, and they're going to get some water. And they're headed to the spring, and at the spring, across this draw, they can see, peeking out from behind this large cedar tree, this really big hair-covered creature, 6 or 7 feet tall, covered entirely with brown hair. And this thing is standing up like a human, peeking out from behind the tree. Fred gets his shooting iron, and he takes 3 shots at the creature. The report was that you could see the bark of the cedar tree skinning by with Fred's bullet, apparently going right into the creature. This is about 300 feet away from where they were. Takes 3 shots. Marion and Fred go down to the tree. There's no body. There's no blood. There's no animal. There's no nothing. And they could see where the bark had skinned off from Fred's shots. Apparently, Fred was reportedly a damn good shot. When they're at the tree, they look further to the north and going up the draw, there's this full head big creature, as they saw it, seemingly unaffected by the shots. And the creature is going up the draw and turns around a couple of times to check out Fred and Marion. Well, at that point, Marion was pretty much the old-time mountain man. He had grown up working the big timber of the Pacific Northwest since he was a kid. And he had hunted and fished and seen pretty much everything on the mountain. But he ordered the guys back at camp, nobody leaves camp unarmed. There's something in this strange. There's something strange in the woods. About that time, Leroy, the son, who's about 18 or 19 years old at the time, going to the spring, which is about 75 feet away from the cabin. Going to the spring to get water, gets back to the cabin, and there's something in the brush behind him. And he turns around about 50 or 75 feet away. There's this big bruiser, what they called mountain devils. Today, by their description, we would call them Sasquatch. There's this creature coming out of the woods. Leroy shoots at it, I believe at the time, twice, and the creature turns around and goes back into the brush. On that encounter, all the rest of the men were in the mine, and so it's 4th of July coming up, and they go back down into town, into Kelso, Longview area to join their family, and it's a bit of an encounter. So they talk to their family and friends about what they saw up there, and according to the reporters who interviewed them later. It was a bit of an issue because Fred and Marion and the family had really sterling reputations of just being very truthful, very square, just very honest people. But they're coming down off the mountain saying that they shot this huge creature up there that they saw in clear daylight. And it's like, well, boy, that's interesting, strange story. So after the 4th of July, it starts getting bad. They go back up to the cabin, and they're not up there for too much longer, only about a week. Let's see, what was it? It was on the 10th. It was on the afternoon of the 10th. Leroy's coming back from the spring again, and the rest of the guys at the time are in the cabin. Leroy's coming back right by the cabin. Same thing happens again, and another creature comes out of the woods. Leroy takes a shot at it. All the men start coming out of the cabin hearing the shot. And Marion Smith estimated that about 16 rounds between all of them, about 16 rounds went into this creature from all the different men, again, seemingly to no effect. Apparently, at that time in the afternoon of Thursday, July the 10th, Fred Beck took the final shot. The creature was right at the edge of the precipice that goes down into Ape Canyon, right by the cabin. And the creature either fell off the cliff into the canyon, or it crouched down and scrambled down. And so it's like, crap, man, this is getting very heavy and intense. So the night is coming on, and all the men are in the cabin, and they're talking to, Friday morning, tomorrow morning, we better get the hell out of here, man. This is getting way too scary. And so the sun is going down. And so this is night of July the 10th, and this must have been about 9 or 10 o'clock. Something hits the side of the cabin really, really damn hard, enough to knock out one of the split logs that they had used for chinking to put between the logs. They also packed it with mud, and so the chinking falls out. The hole that was created was about the size, maybe about 2 feet long, and about 4 or 5 inches on one end. I do have a picture of the side of the cabin, and they look out, and in the moonlight, they can see 6 or 7 of these creatures dancing around outside the cabin out in the moonlight. Big, hair-covered creatures, 6 to 8 feet tall, and then all hell breaks loose. These creatures are throwing rocks and boulders onto the roof. They're climbing up on top of the roof, trying to beat their way through the roof to get in. Crap, start tearing apart the beds. They're just like, fir bough, kind of the rough bunks made out of fir boughs. And they blockade the door. Something's beating on the door. They found out later that actually something was digging underneath the cabin on the uphill side to try to dig in to get into them. This attack on the cabin lasts all night long. These guys build up the fire inside. They're shooting through the roof. They're screaming. They're yelling, "Please go away. We're going to leave, and we're never going to come back again." This attack on the cabin happens all night long. As the sun is barely coming up, suddenly everything goes quiet, and they look out the hole, and they can't see anything. And they find the courage to unblock the door, and they open up the door, and there's rocks strewn everywhere. There's these large human-like footprints everywhere where they had stacked up some leftover shingles that they had made to make the roof. There was a stack of them. They're scattered everywhere. So what do? You grab your gun, you grab your tobacco, and you get the hell out of there. And that's what they did. It's about a 6 or 7 mile hike back to the truck where they had parked it by Spirit Lake. The first person they see there is Bill Welch, the forest ranger, and his wife. And it's like, Bill, the rest of the guys go in the truck. Marion talks to Bill, and it's like, Bill, I got him. I shot him. We were shooting them all night long. And Bill's like, what were you shooting? A mountain devil. Mountain devil, huh, Marion? Yeah. You mean a cougar? No, it wasn't a cougar. It was a mountain devil. And Wolverine? And no, it was a mountain devil. We got him. I just wanted to let you know if we got him. And Bill Welch was like, well, okay, Marion. Yeah, whatever you say. And Marion goes to the truck, and he's rounding around to get into the driver's side, and Bill follows him. In a 1966 interview, Bill Welch said that when he looked in the truck that day, he had never seen a group of grown men more scared in their life. He said they were just quiet and just a white as sheet. And so they drove down into town, as I would if I were them. The very first thing that they do is stop and they have a beer or two or five at the Blue Ox Tavern in Kelso. And they talk, and the word gets to the bartender, and then word gets out all over town about the attack on the cabin by this band of mountain devils, and it hits the press within about 24 hours on the Longview Daily News. So that's kind of the quick elevator ride about what happened in 1924 up at Ape Canyon. So, and then immediately after that, it's all over the press. At that time, we had the wire, the AP wire, and I've seen the story travel in July of 1924 as far east as Missouri, I think, went way up into British Columbia. Story went down to L.A. It kind of went all over the world. And what ended up happening that summer is what they call the Great Ape Hunt of 1924, where everyone was going up there to bag one of these, ape men. It was one of the very first times, honestly, that we end up with that term ape man in our culture, in our media culture at the time. Ape man had been used a little bit before by Edgar Rice Burroughs in Tarzan series, but that's basically one of the first times I found prominently of the use of the word ape man in our culture. And so there were a lot of people up there taking pot shots at anything that, anytime the bushes shook or whatever. And finally, this Skamania, one of the forest rangers out of Skamania County on the south side of the mountain, ordered everyone that no one goes into the woods armed. Everyone had to check their weapons at the forest ranger station because he was terrified that someone was going to get shot. Nobody got shot, but also they never bagged a mountain devil either.
So, were you able to find anything historically as far as these guys giving interviews at the time, and or did they describe, outside of just hairy beasts, did they have any specific descriptions of what these things look like?
You bet. Let's see, if I remember correctly, all five of the men who were there that night on July the 10th, all of them were interviewed. Some of them extensive, some of them, not that extensive. As a matter of fact, Leroy Perry Smith, the youngest, he was very short and sweet about it. He said, I don't know what that was up there, but I know that I never want to have anything to do with it ever again. And he meant it. He shut his mouth. As an older man, John Green actually visited Kelso, and he interviewed Fred Beck. And he knew that Leroy Smith was in Kelso at the time, but he knew that Leroy didn't want to talk about it. So that's what Leroy said in the interview in 1924. Marion and Fred, no, they talked at length, and the general description that they gave at the time was a large hair-covered creature, sort of a pointy head, no neck. They noted ears that you could see that were sort of pointy on the top. Huge chested, very narrow hips, sort of built like a tank, and able to take great strides, go up these slopes like humans generally can't. So that was generally the description that they gave in 1924. Sasquatch was not in our nomenclature, of course, until J.W. Burns came around. Bigfoot was sort of used a little bit with some mining claims down in Oregon. So I got to say that Jerry Crew and the rest down in Bluff Creek did not, in my opinion, invent the word Bigfoot. Bigfoot was known a little bit before the Patterson-Gimlin issue and Jerry Crew incident. But these guys didn't have that word. They called them mountain devils. And so their description of the mountain devil definitely seems to fit the contemporary encounters that we hear about today.
It's always interesting to me geographically when I interview people that have had encounters with these things, and they tend to vary in their descriptions. Obviously, Pacific Northwest, they tend to be bigger and more human-like in ways and less aggressive. And then towards the south, like in the areas I'm in North Carolina, South Carolina, Louisiana, Georgia, Alabama, those kind of places, they seem to be smaller and they seem to be a little more high-strung and aggressive. And everybody has their name for it, right? So
Right.
In the south, they call them boogers, wood boogers or whatever. So it would make sense given the description that they would call them mountain devils or whatever they came up with to describe it. Because like you said, there wasn't really anything in the nomenclature to say, hey, this is what this is. This is a box we can check. And the story always fascinates me. It's always, I put myself in that position of what those guys must have been going through in that cabin when these things are outside trying to tear their way in. I can only imagine what that was like. And I myself would have probably stopped for a beer and a shot of whiskey on the way down as well. So
Right on, exactly. That's a very interesting point. You brought up a couple of really good points. I completely agree with you that some of the behavioral characteristics that come out of these reports, it is different. Also, the physical description that come out of these reports is different. It does seem to vary geographically. You hear famous stories about skunk ape issues, down south, southeast. And it is generally smaller, maybe perhaps in the vicinity of like 5 feet-ish or so. I've heard varying reports regarding hair color or fur color. There are reports coming out of them where they're described as blonde, say, as opposed to, dark brown or red. The one thing about the reaction of the miners, especially directly after the attack, they were hitting that trail to Spirit Lake, and they all agreed. Go into the truck. Nobody say anything to anybody. They're going to think we're crazy, and we don't want the problems that everyone thinks we're crazy. We have families and kids and jobs and everything. But they hit there. They get into town, and they can't not talk about it. They have to tell someone, and so the word gets out. In a lot of, I'm mainly the historical research guy, and Brian, you and I have lots of friends who deal with more contemporary reports and interviewing contemporary encounters, contemporary witness. I've only done a little bit of that, where I'm kind of known as a local Bigfoot guy, and even though I'm the historical research guy, it's hey, go talk to Marc. He knows everything about Bigfoot, right? So I get to talk to people. And it's almost, even though, I'm not a therapist or a counselor, the best thing that I can equate it to is sort of a PTSD issue. A lot of these people have these encounters, and it's almost like it's a looping issue in their head. They have, once they get going, remembering their encounter, it's looped in their head, and they can't talk about it. A lot of the time, they can't not talk about it. They, of course, reserve telling their story until they feel like they're in a safe place where they can talk to someone who will actually listen to them. But it's like actually going through terrible, terrible combat or some sort of horrific accident or something. You can never get rid of it out of your head. So I find that similar to what the miners went through, too.
Yeah, definitely interviewing as many people as I interview and talking to them about their encounters, oftentimes I'm the first person they ever really tell about it. I mean, some of them don't even tell their husbands, their wives, their, nobody in their friend group, obviously. So it's one of those things I agree greatly that a lot of these encounters are not very pleasant. I don't think these things are the friendly forest giants. And these people have PTSD. I know what it looks like. I've seen it in people over and over and over the years, and you can tell. I mean, there's plenty of people that don't even come on the show that I've spent time trying to interview and document their encounters, and they just can't. They literally can't get through the story without breaking down. So
right, exactly. Yeah. The one of the greatest things about working on this project for so long, and kind of being associated with being the Ape Canyon dude or whatever. I've had a lot of people come, even though I think in my head, I'm getting at the very bitter end of this research project. Still, sometimes I get a call or come across someone who has more to add. They knew Fred Beck, or they're related to the family, And so there's always something more, a little bit more coming out. No project is ever dead. And one of the greatest people that I feel pretty honored to meet and get to know is a woman named Betty, and she lives in the Kelso Longview area. And because of Leroy Perry Smith, his young age at the 1924 attack, he ended up with 2 birth children and 2 people that he and his wife adopted. And Betty ends up being Leroy's daughter. And she's an older woman now in her 70s. And so I was able to contact her. And when I first contacted her, the crazy thing about it is that she grew up in the Kelso Longview area and lived there all of her life. She knew kind of about the Ape Canyon story, but she had no idea that that was actually her dad and her grandfather that was involved in that story until Marc calls her up and, springs the news on her about it. And so we start trading information, and she does her own research, and she's like, my God, that was my dad. And one of the first interviews I did with her over the phone, I didn't spring the whole Bigfoot Sasquatch thing on her yet, because I was just kind of like nervous making a cold call to an older woman in Kelso. But I asked her, did your dad ever talk about the early days of his mining activity with her grandfather, Marion, up in Kelso? And she's like, no, he never really did. But it's kind of funny that you mentioned that, because when Dad was dead, she and her brother were cleaning out Leroy's dresser drawer, and they found this small little burlap sack in the top dresser drawer, and it had had little gold nuggets in it, and we never really knew where that came from. And I was like, oh, my God, Betty, I couldn't stand it, What if that's the Ape Canyon gold right there? I guess her brother still has it, or somebody has it. But when Leroy Perry Smith said, I don't want to have anything to do with that ever again, he meant it, because he didn't talk to anybody about it for the rest of his life.
And I think that's a very telling part of the story, because you would imagine if something like that happens to 5 people, you're going to have that division just based on who they are as people going into that event, right? So if they're predisposed to talk about everything that happens in their life, they're the life of the party blabbermouth, then the more reserved people, somebody's going to write a book. They're going to try to capitalize on it. Somebody's going to shut down and never talk about it ever again. And then you're going to have those middle of the road, hey, I might tell you over a beer, but that's about as far as it goes. Right. So I think that just adds validity to the story, that every single person basically had different reactions and handled it differently. And I think it just lends credibility to the story, frankly.
Sure, you bet. Yeah, you bet. Where not everybody, like you said, not everybody was like, hey, guess what happened to me? It varied across the 5 men that it happened to. They were just sort of, like you pointed out, they were handling it differently as they could. And I guess that's what happens to all of us, and anything that happens to us that's highly dramatic. Everyone has to deal with it their own way.
Well, I definitely believe in giving credit where credit is due, because you didn't just do research and read books and do the historical document research. You actually got up off your ass and went and found the cabin.
Thank you.
I mean, that is amazing to me. I've always respected your work, but that's one of those things that really, because that's not an easy place to get to, right? It's not like you're just going on a hike down around the corner of your house. I mean, this is a very remote area. So just really quickly, how did you get to the point where you found the actual site of the original cabin?
Well, it started about 5 years into the research of the project, where I started to kind of think about, oh geez, there was no map or really good physical description of where the cabin and mine were in 1924. It was just this rough set of clues that I had gotten from, mining record and the newspaper reports. There were a couple reporters went up there after the attack, and they described what they saw going down to the cabin in 1924. And so I started to realize, it's like, holy smokes, where this cabin is let's see, roughly maybe 2009 is when I first started going up there and looking. I started to realize, it's like, damn, where the cabin could have been in 1924 could have very well survived the eruption just through this fluke of nature of just the existing geography and existing topography, where the cabin probably was within, say, a quarter-mile radius, probably survived the eruption. And so it was not a one-trip, overnight camping trip in order to get to the cabin site. It took about 3 or 4 years to do it, and it's incredibly dangerous. There's hardly anything to hold on to onto this, very open, rocky escarpment, and it's like, golly, I don't know, off of say a zenith, say a vertical up and down. It's probably like a 20-degree slope in some places, a 30-degree slope off of the vertical, not off the horizontal. And so it's like, once you accidentally fall on your butt and stop sliding, you're probably just going to end up dying, going straight down into the bottom of the canyon. And so I was just kind of like poking my way along through the trips, maybe 2 or 3 times a year. And finally, in 2013, evidence started coming out of the ground, and try to make it quickly, because I talk about the life of the party. I can talk about this all night long. The way that I ended up getting to that point was that I have a couple more leads, but basically right now I only have one decent photo of the cabin, which is actually made up of 2. One's the short side of the cabin, and one's the long side of the cabin. It was about 10 by 20 or so. And that was a reporter who went down there after the attack and took photos of the cabin just the week after the attack. And in the foreground of the photo of the cabin, you can see the freshly cut stumps of the trees that they had cut just slightly uphill from the cabin in order to build it. And so I had been speaking with the head archaeologist at the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, in which this site lies, and he confirmed with me that no, this is like never, ever been commercially logged. You can see it by the time you get down to that area. There are huge Douglas fir trees, 7 or 8 feet in diameter, massive, massive trees. And so the point being is that I knew with the lack of logging that had taken place in this, very remote area on a very, very steep slope, with the lack of logging, I knew if I could find some sort of rotten stumps, I knew that I would be close to where the cabin could have been. And so it was in 2013. It was just me and a friend, Gabe. We were fighting our way through the vine maple and, trying to make our way down further and further down along the slope on the north side of the canyon. And finally, we found a rotten stump. And then we find another rotten stump. And then we find another rotten stump. Probably so far we've found like about 4 or 5. They're barely there anymore. But stumps can, once they're cut, stumps under the right conditions can last a very, very, very long time in the woods. And so once we got there, we break out the metal detector. And what we ended up finding in the ground at first was just a small collection of old nails. And we started looking a little bit more, and this was it was surprising. It was only about 5 or 6 inches below the natural ground. When you kind of scuff with it in your hands, you get like about, an inch or 2 of pumice and ash, and then underneath that, it's older natural ground underneath the pumice and ash from the eruption. So below that layer, we ended up finding the rotten, a corner of the cabin foundation of this old rotten logs with the nails still driven into it. Found a spoon that was left over, found a piece of wire, baling wire, I don't know, maybe like 10 or 8 gauge wire. There was curlicued like it was used as a baling. And then after that, ended up finding about a 10-inch piece of broken bucksaw laying next to the stump where the miners probably broke the saw while they were cutting down one of the trees. So once we got to that point of finding the foundation, finding these artifacts in the ground, with the proximity to the geographic features that we were told where the cabin was in relationship to the slope, in relationship to Ape Canyon, suddenly everything made sense, and we knew that we had found actually the Ape Canyon cabin site.
I think that is super badass, man. I can only imagine how happy you were. I mean, how elated were you when you realized what moment was it, like when you found the nails? Was it after the couple of stumps where you said, oh shit, I found this thing?
Man, Brian, I got to tell you, at the time, and still to this day, it feels like I'm walking through this sort of like, surreal dream. It's like, how possibly could I have found this? It's like, this can't be real. But I look at the stuff that in my file, I guess I did find what I think is the Ape Canyon. It's just crazy. It's just crazy. I didn't sleep for like 6 days.
I can only imagine, man. It's like that. It's that pinnacle of everything coming together and all the work and the research. I am super stoked for you, man. I think it's an awesome thing. So
there was every single reason for me not to find the cabin. There was every single reason. A bunch of people had been, well, not a bunch of people. Peter Byrne had done it a couple of times. There were other researchers who had gone up there, and they didn't find anything. But I don't know. I got lucky, I guess.
I think it's way more than luck, man. I think it's a lot of hard work, and I think you put your blood, sweat, and tears into it, and it paid off. So
thanks.
I know at one point you were up there. I know you probably don't like to talk about it, but you had somewhat of an encounter, and this is an Encounters podcast, right? People come to hear about Sasquatch Encounters. So tell us what you heard up there.
Well, it was rather disturbing when you think about it too much, because it was the year in 2013 where we actually found the first solid evidence of the cabin. Whether you believe in coincidence or not, it was a strange trip. It was Saturday. Yeah, it was. Yeah, that's right. It was Saturday night. This is late June in 2013. Weird coincidence, because there were 5 miners up at the cabin in 1924. On that trip, we were camping not that far away, and there were 5 of us in the tent or in the campsite. And so this was just as the sun was going down on Saturday evening, and so it was about 9 o'clock or so. And this is not that far from the top of Mount St. Helens. I don't know, maybe about a mile or so. And we're on top of this butte, and there's this little bit of a draw to the west of us that lasts about a quarter of a mile. And then from there, the ground starts shooting up the mountain very, very quickly. The sun was going down, and one of the guys who was with us, Ben, is like, you guys, shut up. Come over here. And Ben is standing on the edge of the draw. And we're like, what? And he's like, shut up, just listen. And about quarter mile away, maybe a little bit more, up on the ridgetop just above us in the trees, there's something up there, and it's talking for a while. You can hear it so clearly. You can hear it really clearly because the sun's setting, and cold air from the glaciers naturally wants to rush down, so it's carrying the sound very, very well. And it was just this gobbledygook howling sound of up there, like, crap, what the hell is that? And it goes on for about 2 or 3 minutes or so, maybe longer, I don't know. Time kind of stood still, and then it went quiet. And then about a minute later or so, I'm going to say to my left, and we were facing the mountain, so to my left means south along this ridge line. We hear maybe, I would guess, maybe about 800 feet, 1,000 feet. There's a second voice up there. That kind of thing. And it stops, and then the first one answers it back, just like in the 1924 story, right? And there's these two things are talking back and forth with each other, presumably about us. And they're going on for, I don't know, 5 minutes, 6 minutes or so. And then they shut up. And then another 1,000 feet to the south there's a third one. And the 3 of them start talking back and forth to each other of these voices. Well, as things where we listened for a good hour or more, finally, way down by the Lewis River, towards the Lewis River to the south, it was a ways down there, maybe a good couple of miles. We finally heard a fourth one and then a fifth one, and they're just talking back and forth to each other all night long. Later, coming back, and I have heard these before, the closest thing that I can equate it to is Ron Moorhead Sierra sounds. It sounded just, I hate to use this, catchphrase, but it sounded like the samurai chatter combined with some howling up there. And so the smartest thing to do would be to leave, but we didn't. And so you just get in your tent and pull the sleeping bag up around your ears, and you try to go to bed. Oh, shoot. One thing before I go on with this portion, I have to tell you, my friend Brad and I, we are walking up the trail that day. Yeah, that's right. It was the day before, and Brad's in front of me, and he's up in front of me like 500 feet, and he's standing there in the middle of the trail, and I'm like, what's going on? And up what used to be a logging road, up in the brush, you can hear something weird up there, some sort of weird, like a drunken biker kind of chatter. That night, I didn't hear it. Friday night, Brad heard something talking to him down in that bowl, in that little draw, very close to his tent. So anyway, Saturday night, we hear these 4 or 5 things up there talking to us, and we all go to bed. And then Sunday morning, the sun's just barely coming up. I don't know, whenever the sun comes up in July. So it must have been like 6 or something. And I remember looking through the little screen in my little Hello Kitty tent that I'm in, and I can see the light in the sky is about the same amount of light as when the sun was going down the night before when we heard these voices. And I'm laying there, and I can hear them up on the exact same ridgeline. I can hear them talking to us again up there. I heard like 2 or 3 of them this time on Sunday morning. Well, I shut my eyes, and I try to get back to sleep. And, maybe an hour or so later, okay, it's time to get up and make coffee and everything. And Ben gets out of his tent, and he says, "Did you guys smell that?" And I was like, no, smell what? Ben said that he smelled a smell right there in camp that it actually woke him up. He said it was an incredibly heavy, musky, heavy animal smell right there in camp. And we were only tented like within about 30 feet of each other. He said he swore it was right outside the tent. And so I said, well, man, did you get out and look? And he's like, hell no, I'm not getting out. So it lasted for a little while, like, according to Ben, and then disappeared. So that was one of the weirdest things that has pretty much happened to me in my life. But that was the weirdest thing that happened up at Ape Canyon. And it turned out about, I believe it was the next year, in 14 or maybe 15, I was up there with another group of guys, and we were hiking out after having fun up there at Ape Canyon, and the Blake and Casey, 2 guys with us, they kind of lose the trail because we're in the Plains of Abraham, and it's very, very sandy and rocky, and there are no trees, and it's kind of easy to lose the trail. And so they were crossing this sort of glacial runoff draw, and they had lost the trail and gotten off trail down this draw, maybe about 500 or 600 feet, and ended up where Blake stayed there, and Casey backtracks on the trail to catch the rest of us, brings us down to where Blake was because they had found a print. And the best way I can describe it, I know I'm not saying it's a big footprint, but it is a big footprint, and it was in about I can't remember the measurements, but maybe about 14 or 15 inches long. And sure enough, way off trail, right in the middle of this sandy bar, there was a human footprint. Fortunately, at that point, my friend Brad had brought plaster, and we were able to cast it. Something's going on up there. I don't know what it is, but something's going on.
Well, it's fitting that after all that research and doing the footwork and the leg work to find this place, that you would have some sort of a Sasquatch encounter to sort of cap all that off for you. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, without a doubt. I've been up there before, not as distinctive as that 2013 if you want to call it, vocalizations that we heard, or the next year where we found the print. But there have been a couple of other strange things that have happened up there along the lines of vocalizations. No Class A sightings at all, and I haven't seen anything that I would call a strange creature or an unknown creature, but we have heard voices up there, and I have no idea what it is.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So the book is never closed. The chapter is never completed on a thing like Ape Canyon, but what's got your interest nowadays? Or have you moved on to a different project?
Yeah, I have, and I have to tell you, it loaded the firebox for me, and I got a lot of steam under me now, because I have like about 3 or 4 projects that I'm working on. One, unfortunately, has been put on the back burner, and it's incredibly difficult to deal with right now as far as document research, because, as everyone says, oh, it's all on the internet. It's not all on the internet. Documents, if they're going to be on the internet, require someone to actually take it, scan it, digitize it, and index it, and put it on the internet. Well, as any, archivist or librarian or any document person knows, that takes a lot of work and a lot of funding and a lot of money. So if you're doing any kind of document research, internet's okay, for like 1% to kind of like get you headed in the right direction. But really, there's nothing else except to go to. If you know where a document is that you need to get to, honestly, you have to go there yourself. And so with the times that we're living in right now, so many courthouses, so many libraries, so many places where these documents are, you and I can't get to it. We can't get in because it's closed, right? Also, my personal opinion, even though many researchers and many professional archivists are good, I have a hard time relying on them. Like, hey, can you find this one strange record from 1908 for me? And they call me back and they say, oh, I didn't find it. I was like, really? I need to get in there because I bet I can find it, kind of thing. So one of the projects I'm working on is it's the Thompson Flat Monster Project, also called the Wild Man of the Sixes, down in Southwest Oregon. And it's probably going to take me a very long time, not only because of the lack of access to these documents, but this event, if you will, took place over the period of about 30 years. Between, say, about 1875 or so, well into the early aughts of the 1900s. And it was, again, like you and I were just talking about, Brian, it was one of those instances where it's not pleasant. It's not a pleasant story at all, where there was this whole series at the very beginning, bam, in the 1870s, there was a man who was a prospector up at Thompson Flat, and he was prospecting by himself, and something very, very, he was such a quick flash, something very big and hairy was able to pick him up by his clothes and just throttle him, kind of beat him up a little bit and throw him down the slope. He fell unconscious, and then fortunately a couple days later, some friends went up looking for him and found him and were able to take him back into town and kind of nurse him back to health. After that, it was this very strong series of events, these very unpleasant encounters with this very large creature that we would call Sasquatch today, getting into camps, tearing the hell out of it, throwing everything everywhere, they receive a lot of shots by these guys shooting at them that never really didn't do anything to the creature. Most of the time, the guys just ended up had stopped shooting, turned around and just ran. One of the biggest, two large stories that come out of Tom, starting in the late 1800s, within about a period of about 16 or 18 months, in Thompson Flat, there was this very small mining community where a group of people were working on their individual placer locations for their gold in a really limited area. It was only about half a mile long and a quarter mile wide at Thompson Flat on the north side of the South Fork of the Sixes River. And they would come after they were done working during the day. They'd all come back into camp and share food and share stories, and, kind of a small community. There are about 40 people there, and his friends around the fire. And it's like, where's John? He should be here by now. And they go and they check in this little cabin that he had built, and John's not there. So it's like, crap, we'd better go up to his claim. And there they find John, and he's dead. And his head has been bashed in with a very large rock. The report was, the rock is laying right next to him, all bloodied, and apparently the murder weapon. Over the period of about 16 or 18 months, about 5 people die. Well, no, 5 people die up there. The very last one, and the cause of death, the reports were all basically the same, of either the bodies being beaten to death or their heads bashed in with like blunt force trauma of some sort. And the very last one was a guy named Mike Madigan. He went by the name Grizz Madigan because he had a bad bear encounter years before that left him some scars on his face. And he was pretty much the last one up there, because after all these men disappearing and showing up dead, the gold mining activity dropped off really dang quickly, and basically everyone left except for Madigan. Madigan had an encounter a few months prior where there was a creature up on top of a bluff and ended up killing his 2 dogs while Madigan's taking shots into this creature. So Madigan's the only one up there, and he isn't seen for a number of days. And a friend of his, Ramsey, is in town. And like, man, I've got to go up and look for Mike. And so Ramsey goes up there, and he's looking around where the camp is and everything, and he can't find them. But he finds this pile of rocks that is sort of an unnatural pile of rocks. What's that doing here? Ramsey kind of clears the rocks away, and there's Madigan's body. He recognized Madigan's body because it was starting to decompose badly, because Ramsey recognized his revolver still in its holster and his knife. So Madigan was the last guy to die up there. Encounters kept on going for a number of years until 1904, when there was a small cabin up there, and there were 2 men in there. And it was called the Harrison Cabin because it was the Ben Harrison Sr. Gold claim. It was gold mining going on up there. And these 2 guys are in there, and the cabin just in the middle of the night gets beaten on something really big. Something's hammering on it, just, pounding the cabin. And they go out, and they can see this huge creature just a few feet away. A lot of the times, talking about hair color, a lot of the time keeps getting a repeating story up there at Thompson Flat of being described as yellow fur or blondish, a lighter color kind of creature up there, still in the vicinity of 6 to 7 feet tall. These guys see this creature, take a few shots at it, and the creature just turns around and goes off into the trees. Within about just a few weeks later, one of the men is still up there with the 2 Harrison boys, Ben Jr. And Bob Harrison, and they're in there at night in the Harrison cabin, and the exact same thing happens again. The cabin gets beaten on by something out there. At this point, they're ready. They go out there, and there's a creature sort of returning. They take some shots at it, and the creature just keeps on going. But at one point, a huge rock comes sailing out of the woods and just misses them by, just a little wail. So they did get return fire by a large rock coming back at them. So again, with physical evidence, with these stories that grab my attention, physical evidence is number one. I have some pretty darn good leads. One of them, thanks to a good friend, Ken Christensen, who grew up in the area and is involved with the Harrison story, a little bit about Sasquatch, but a little bit about something else that happened strange up at Thompson Flat. She contacted me and has provided a lot of information. And so I have a strong feeling like I'm kind of hot on the trail of being able to recover the Harrison cabin, or at least the site of the Harrison cabin. Something else physically that's fun to think about. All of this area of Thompson Flat is still in the Rogue River National Forest now. And up there, right on the edge of Thompson Flat, there's a small burial plot. And most of the grave markers, there's a little bit of stone up there, but most of the grave markers are old cedar that's kind of rotted and illegible. But the Genealogical Society was able to supply me with burial records, and there's only about 5 people buried up there. And the names of the 5 people buried at Thompson Flat match the old newspaper report of the 5 men who were killed up there by unknown means at the same time when these very aggressive creature encounters are going on.
Crazy.
Thompson Flat.
Wow.
Yeah, it is really crazy for sure. So that's a fun project. I'm going to try to make it down there hopefully this year. I have an Ape Canyon trip that I'm going to try to do with some friends this summer, which is pretty darn foolhardy. So I'm going to, but I'm going to see if I can make it down to Thompson Flat. The Ape Canyon trip this year, it was just me and a friend talking over the internet, and we kind of talked ourselves into this, and it's pretty stupid. I've had a lot of not so much climbing experience, but single rope technique experience because I've been caving for about 30 years or so. And then my friend John. He's an old rescue rope work guy. And so one thing led to another, and I've always wanted to get him up there to Ape Canyon. He's a great historian. And we kind of talked ourselves into a stupid idea of going to the cabin site and seeing if we can find some sort of access point where with a lot of rope work, we can actually get ourselves into the bottom of the canyon directly below the cabin site to see what that looks like. And just do some metal detecting and see what we can find down there. There's only been one report of someone actually doing the climb down into the bottom of Ape Canyon, and it's really stupid to even think that we should do this. But that'll be a fun trip if we live to tell about it.
It sounds super stupid and super awesome. I'm jealous that I'm not going to be able to go. That would be awesome. I'm into the stupid stuff, man. I love it.
Oh, my God. Yeah, I eat it up. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome, man. I can't thank you enough for coming on and talking about it. I know you've done it 1,000 times, but like I said, there's got to be a few people out there that it was probably brand new and who better to hear the Ape Canyon story from than the Ape Canyon guy himself, Marc Myrsell. I can't thank you enough for your time, man. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, Brian, give me a break. I'm going to talk about it 1,000 more times. And besides that, give me a call. And we can talk some more here in 6 months. Okay, we can talk again in 6 months if I'm alive, and and I'll catch you up on some of the other fun projects I'm working on too.
That sounds good, man. I'll definitely do that.
Okay, good. I'd like that a lot.
And that's it for tonight's show, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. Remember, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. You can be at brian@sasquatchodyssey.net. Have a great night, and we'll see you guys next week.